Three, two, one. Welcome, everyone. I want to bring folks in to share the space with the Community South, this based in North Carolina, a organization that is geared to archiving and Black workers' efforts and being a educational wing to deal with Black workers' leadership and education. We want to talk today about the auto workers' strike, which expanded to, I think, 38 locations now. So we're engaged in conversation with Robin Kelly, a professor of UCLA, author of numerous books, the real Clarence Thomas, who was worked in San Francisco, the dock workers, is one of the officials there, and Cynthia Brenda, who also was with AFNI, if I'm correct with that, and Willie Brown, who is a Durham public works worker who is, I think they're also on strike. And so we're having a conversation earlier, and Brenda Stokely, you've been in the forefront of a lot of union activity in New York. What role should Black workers be playing, or what should we be doing in relationship to this national auto worker strike that's going on now? You're on mute, Brenda. Brenda, you're on mute.
Did you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Could you just repeat the last part of what you said about?
So how should we, what should Black workers, what role should we be playing? And how do we understand what's happening in terms of this national auto strike that's in place now?
I think that one of the important things is is for all workers, and particularly our Black and brothers and brown brothers and sisters, that we need to take our best people who know how to speak to folks and actually is either in a union fighting back now or had that experience, to try to give them, excuse me, as much support. One would be what's going to be talked about later. One of it's going to be trying to set up ways that we can collectively support the people that are out there in the street. And secondly, to give the history of the labor movement and the role that Black people have always played in that. And more importantly, the style of the resistance and excuse me, sorry, and what we should be doing now, learning from the past, the things that we helped us win victories, and the things that put us back. One of the key things is the type of corrupt leadership that is in most of our, and mostly all of the unions, except for very few. You could always go back to Clarence is the biggest model, the longshoremen, but really bring to people who are now, they feel afraid. That's one of the main things, that people feel afraid because they don't know that there's other options and they don't know about the resistance. So I think that's the important things to try to get back to people.
And Willie, I understand that there is some action going on in North Carolina with the public workers that there. What's happening, and how are the workers there? What kind of discussions, what are they thinking about as relates to the auto workers strike?
Well, most of the can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Most of the footwork has been done. But the discussion now is about one, I want to make sure that we clearly understand that we didn't make a request. We made a demand. And that's important because a lot of people has not really gathered the fact that we came in demanding something, not asking.
Right.
The relationship right now is they want to negotiate, but they want to negotiate on terms that they have set, and they're trying to change the language of our demand. Like the language of central workers. It's a lot of small stuff, but words have meaning. And when people try to redefine your argument, it weakens it. They have agreed to split $6.5 million and try to reach our demand of 5,000, which I've equated to around 4,000 and some change.
Now, this is in Durham, right?
This is in Durham.
Okay.
UE 150, you know, we have posed a formidable, as we informed ourselves as a formidable opponent. When it was one time, we were nothing to speak of because of the level of fear, because fear will restrict your will to do something that is necessary. But we have actually, we've beaten Goliath. You know, when you decide that you're going to withhold your labor, and city people come out and address your concerns by giving you almost $50,000 to pay workers who were on, they don't like to use the word strike, but it is what it is. Then is
there any communications, any coordination with or are there any auto workers in that area that there's some solidarity with in terms of what's happening with your strike?
Well, we stand all over the country with UE 150. And matter of fact, UE period stands all over the country with the United Auto Workers. We have people right now in 150 chapter in Charlotte that are on the line. You know, they're on the line right now, wherever we at. Because I mean, the unions have gotten to the point where we have to support one another because we have a serious situation with funds. And these corporate capitalists are just making all the money and cutting the people out on the bottom who barely survived it. Everybody's in debt right now. If you work for in the public sector or even the private sector, people are in debt because we don't make enough to really take care of our families. We don't. We just don't. We don't. But the corporate giants are just making all this money. We getting probably new billionaires about a day. But we're starving on the low end. You know, we're starving. There's nowhere around the fact that if you work in the public or private sector, these companies are getting rich and you're getting poor by the day.
So we got the real Clarence Thomas with us. Clarence is out in the West Coast. Clarence is no stranger to strikes. As a young man, when he was in college, when they had the San Francisco was a strike at the university. What is one of the longshore workers retired? Clarence, what's happening out there? What's the sentiment and what are people talking about in regards to this auto workers strike?
Well, first of all, I'm great. I'm very grateful to be a part of this discussion. People still look at me as a member of ILWU, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, Local 10, as an active member. That's because I'm retired from the waterfront, but not from the struggle. The ILWU has just completed some 13 months of negotiations with our employer, the Pacific Maritime Association, dealing with many of the same issues that the sisters and brothers in the UAW are dealing with, such things as AI and robotics, and, technology that is displacing workers. One of the things that I think is really critical, when I say we, I'm talking about those of us that are on this Zoom call right now. We need to establish some kind of relationship and contact with some Black UAW members who, first of all, who are not afraid to talk to members, to trade unionists outside of their own organization, so that we can set up some Zoom calls and have some discussions to get some information straight from them. There are various entities that would be very strategic in getting the word out. I know people that are very active in the APRI, the very militant group in Seattle, led by Gabriel Proud, who's a member of Local 52 of the ILWU. Chris Silvera, who is with the Teamsters, he is very close to Richard Hooker out of Philadelphia. They do a podcast on Sundays. But I think it's critical that we be able to establish a relationship with some people, some what I would call in the militant radical tradition in the UAW, who are willing to talk to us so that we can begin to get the word out. Of course, it's important to do things like get resolutions adopted. In the ILWU, it's a democratic bottom-up, not top-down organization. We can have resolutions adopted at the passed at the executive board and then to the membership. We can even have members of the. We don't have to have officers. We can have rank and filers from UAW to speak at to our members. So these are things that we can get started on right away. But I think that the Zoom idea and talking with folks, and then we can really get the ball rolling. I would just like to say this, that Sister Brenda and I had the opportunity to work together starting in 2004 when we had to take on the officialdom of labor as well as the Democratic Party in organizing the Million Worker March. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because that was a rank and file initiated action. It was endorsed by our membership, our leadership, and they turned around and did everything they could to undermine it. So, and it's very discouraging to see Sean Fain as the only person who's speaking. He has this black woman who's standing. I don't know who she is, but she's not speaking. I haven't heard her speak. And when the media is around, all of the questions are being directed to him and not to her. So it's critical. I think that we have to recognize the fact that even inside of the trade union movement, there's a tremendous amount of anti-black sentiment, if not just outright white supremacy.
You know,
The leftists can be racist too
yeah,
and reactionary. We saw that play out with the Million Worker March.
Yeah,
So I'm sorry. Go ahead. Somebody else wants to talk.
No. There was a report of how there was a scuffle at one of the sites where people were protesting, were picketing, and they were using the B word and the N word and so forth. But I want to go to Robin Kelly, who is a historian who's also dealt with this issue in terms of labor movement. From your perspective, Robin, how do we contextualize at this moment in terms of this national auto workers strike now? How should we look at it in regards to Black workers?
Right. No, that's a great question. And if you indulge me, I got like a 4-minute capsule history that could explain all this. And before I do that, just to acknowledge what Willie Brown was saying. The three big auto industry, Ford, GM, and Stellantis, made over $250 billion in profits over the last decade. $250 billion. So that's a lot of money. You can begin the story, back in the 1930s, but let's begin in Detroit in May 1968 when 4,000 Black auto workers waged a walkout strike at the Dodge main plant. And we know from that birth the drum movement, Dodge Revolutionary Union movement, and then the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. Why is this relevant? Because the League consistently battled the leadership of the UAW, that movement was crushed by the police that the UAW leadership brought in. And they tried to run for a position on the board of trustees for the UAW and lost. So ask the question, what could have happened had Drum's politics, the League's politics, guided the UAW? They were fighting for better working conditions and wages for Black workers, for all workers, control of the plant, freedom for all workers, and an end to capitalism. But that's not what won. What happens at the end is that A few years later, car sales start to decline, foreign competition leads, and the global slump undermines GM. And what do? They turn to finance. They go into insurance, banking services, mortgages. 1999, GM is selling subprime mortgages, securitizing the debt, selling it off as profit, and of course, contributing to the 2007 financial crisis, which led to not just the bankruptcy of GM, but to the loss of jobs and houses for Black people. Jump forward, what we're dealing with right now in the strike is the fight against the two-tiered system. So you have the massive profits being made without the commensurate increase in wages. That's one issue. But the other issue is that you have this two-tiered system that goes back really to the 90s, where incoming workers, starting at the Ford plant, now industry-wide after 2007, make a lot less than those who have seniority. Who are the who's at the bottom tier? Mostly Black and brown workers. And despite that, and some of the story we may or may not know, we have federal bailouts of the auto industry, 2008, $81 billion under Bush, 2009, then Obama, $10 billion. And GM got $51 billion as part of the deal. 40% of the labor force in tier 2 had to take a 50% wage cut. That means they were making as little as $15 an hour. What happened? General Motors made $35 billion in North American profits alone, paying almost no federal taxes. The CEO, Mary Barra, got like $20 million over that. And then you had another strike in 2019 where GM, UAW struck GM and got a very bad settlement. 3% base wage increases over 2 years, 2 and 4, over a 4-year period, and a small little bonus. So this is sort of where we are now. That's why this strike is so significant. It's fighting for 40% wage increase across the board, fighting to end the two-tier system. And this is really critical. And one last thing I should mention, as problematic as we have this other issue of batteries and cobalt, but one thing that's really interesting is that a lot of Black workers work in the electric vehicle battery factories, and UAW is trying to include them in the contract because they connect to all the industry. So that's in a nutshell where we are. Again, imagine what it would look like if you have different leadership, as Brother Clarence Thomas is talking about. That would be a completely different union, a completely different direction.
And thank you, Robin. Brenda, Clarence raised this question around leadership, and particularly Black leadership in terms of articulating what's happening with the strike. He mentioned a Black woman, who was there when Sean, the president, was speaking. What's your experience as a Black woman who led a union? How do we understand the role, particularly of Black women, and how this impacts Black women in terms of the workplace? How do we address this issue?
Well, I think that there's always been some pushback about that, but even some of the women's organizations that were formed, labor ones, they actually, most of them, and now they're coming out of that now, most of them were just set up by the male leadership. And they were there to dictate and make sure that the women didn't come up with something that they didn't want them to talk about, or that they want a resolution that they weren't going to uphold. They actually also controlled who got elected to these bodies, these women's groups. So for a long time, there's been a whole lot of problems with who is in office. And I think that, and I know I've been in several unions, and the one that I really felt and also organized some, but the thing was that we would always get jammed up in terms of our ability to do things by having both either white men in places in the unions that really should have, because it was top, let me go back. It was like top down. And so instead of looking at this rank and file, see who should be put into a position, you would only see a white man in the labor um, organizations that covered all of the city. And they would be the ones that would be presented as the organizers. Women didn't get to be organizers, and Black people didn't get to be organizers. At the head of the organizing committee in their organization. So that still exists along, I mean, and white men being over like the organizations that were for fabrics and garments and stuff like that. There was always a lot of women. They still are. They might be now in some other country, but they were there doing the work, and there'd be the men that would be over their head. Also in terms of sexually, especially more so in the other countries now. But it's still there, and we have to fight that. And a lot of things are coming to show that the women, the retirees now that are fighting to keep their health, they're primarily all women. Most of them are all women that come out there, and they're in their senior years. So it's, people are waking up. They're not just taking, you're going to speak for me and you're going to be in the picture and I'm going to be over on the side. People are trying to dispense with that altogether. And a lot of women are taking on the idea that we need to get rid of the people that are up over us, which are mainly men.
Mhm. And thanks, Brenda. So Willie, you're in the South, and obviously, in the South, they don't necessarily recognize unions or collective bargaining. What is it you see as a difference in terms of Black workers that are in unions in the right to work state where you are versus non-unions? What are some of the struggles, and how do we continue to organize and build to be able to build power in these unions where there are predominantly Black forces in these unions? Willie, did you freeze? Says that what's Willie?
Uh, City opening.
Okay, we got a bad connection. I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to go to Clarence. Clarence, how do we deal with that discrepancy in terms of where we have unions who have a right to be engaged in collective bargain that's recognized, and in the South it's not, and we're looking at how do we deal with the fact that the South is where we have a lot of Black workers. How do we deal with that question of trying to position them in a point of power and recognizing their right to negotiate contracts? You're on mute, Clarence.
I don't have to tell you, Professor, but there's no quick shortcut. There's no shortcuts here. I think that a good place for us to start, we have to have we need to have a conversation, not a conversation. We need to have a brief history, as what Brother Kelly had outlined, so that folks can get some sense of what the United Auto Workers jobs once represented for the Black community, and for Black people, for Black workers. And because they need to understand the past in order to deal with the future. Because as we know today, the electronic vehicles are being production is being sent to the South for non-union workers. So we're going to have to begin to have this conversation. I would think that we need to put something out, as a statement, a brief history, as what Brother Kelly initiated early. I think that's very, very important to get that information out, so that folks can understand that not only did the UAW provide great incomes and democracy at work, it also created a militant rank and file that was concerned with not only the issues on the job, but issues for the entire working class. And that's what time it is. We need to get that information out. So we're going to have to do some kind of an education. Maybe Brother Kelly is going to be up to putting out something. I know we certainly would be. When I say we, I'm talking about those of us that were involved in the Million Worker March. But we can get something out and maybe some videos along with some I guess the best way to explain it is that we need to start having some constructive Zoom calls with individuals with that organization. But I think we have to have that right away, because people need to understand, because this is the whole thing. Unions not only represent good paying jobs and benefits and those sorts of things. It also provides people, and specifically Black people, with democracy at work. You know, it's from my own union's perspective. I mean, it was a rank and filer by the name of Leo Robinson who wrote a resolution calling for the boycott of South African cargo after he watched something on the news about the Soweto massacres. And that led to our union refusing to handle South African cargo for 11 days. I mean, unions provide an opportunity for the issues of the community to be addressed by the locals, by the unions. And so it is absolutely, now this is one thing then I'm gonna be quiet. One of the reasons why this struggle is so critical and why it's important to all workers, in particularly Black workers, is that the UAW has been in a concessionary bargaining mode for over 40 years. And they're trying to undo some significant damage. And, you know, and I think that people are watching to see, can they actually do something about this? You know, and so it's incumbent upon all of us to be able to do what we can right away. And I think this is a great program you got here, but we need to leave here with some next steps and things that we can do right away and to get back to one another. That's all I got to say right now.
So, thank you, the real Clarence Thomas. Robin, so what's being raised is that this question of automation, that in terms of the shift in terms of what these corporations are doing, it seems like it's trying to go back where it can get the cheapest labor, and the South has been that place. And so, how is what's happening globally in terms of what's happening in Africa in terms of the resources that folks use that's pushing technology, and this whole question of automation and dealing with electric vehicles? You know, how do we see this, and how do we see it impacting black workers, and particularly all workers in general, and how should we approach that in terms of trying to organize workers to be empowered to address this and make sure that there's going to be some equity in terms of how they get paid, and they're not creating these multiple tiers in terms of how they're treated.
Right. Well, to answer that question, let me just pick up where Brother Clarence left off, which is a really important point. That is, auto workers have been at the forefront of some of the most militant struggles, Black rank and file auto workers. The name General Baker is a name that we should all know, right?
Right.
And so when you think about the two questions, that is, well, three questions. One is the question of automation, the question of globalization, and the question of the South. Take the last first. We have to study the Nissan strike, the attempt to organize Nissan factory. It wasn't quite a strike, but they tried to organize and try to win National Labor Relations Board. This is recently, a few years ago, in Canton, Mississippi. And that is something we have to study, because the UAW didn't put the requisite resources that they needed. But the way to win those strikes is through community-based organizing, and both inside the plant and outside. So Mississippi, and as Sister Shafir mentioned in the chat, you got more plants being built in the South, in Georgia and elsewhere. Plants are being built And not just in the South, but the tendency of capital is to go wherever labor is cheapest. So you have you got Ford in South Africa, Ford in Brazil, Ford in Mexico. And here again, some of the most militant opposition emerges in these places where there are auto workers. The Ford company is the master at basically reducing the labor process to just a piece of building something, which then tries to de-skill laborers, and then speed up the process. That's why of all the industries, heavy industries, auto has always been subject to automation. The question of automation was being raised back in the 50s and 60s. It's a really old issue. We think about AI now, but automation was what was forcing a lot of these plants to basically run on 1/3 or 1/4 of the old labor force. And hence you get this massive unemployment. So one of the things we have to think about is, again, continuing to build international solidarity, to know that the struggles of auto workers and all workers in the United States are struggles of workers in China, let alone South Africa and Brazil. And then finally, besides moving towards green energy and the production of vehicles for all, whatever is limited, in a kind of green direction, we got to think really hard about workers' control. That is, workers running factories, owning factories, determining the pace of work, determining the profits. And that struggle for workers' control in cooperatives is one that has to be on the table, because what we get instead is a machine that, as the League of Revolutionary Black Workers pointed out, just literally reduces people to slavery and eats them up, like literally, physically. The impact of the work itself is devastating. So this struggle is just the beginning. It's a really important one we have to support. It's just the beginning. And I think if we could back this and think about what it means to build democracy at the workplace and around worker organizing, the struggle against fascism in the United States will be much stronger.
Thank you, Robin. Brenda, what Clarence was talking about us trying to, do some Zooms, to write something. How should we begin to go about trying to create the type of education needed to reach workers and organized Black workers, so that we would have a stronger voice in terms of addressing these corporations that's trying to expropriate our labor?
I think it has to be done in two levels. Mainly, it should be on the ground in the cities that we're in, and the workers that we have some contacts with and know that they are trying to fight back. To start with those people, and they have other friends that are in these situations that they can bring in. We could use the Zoom. Also, if you have possibly, we could meet people face to face wherever, if they want us to come in and bring in some information and help them think through what they have to do to fight back. This other layer is what Clarence is talking about, is a whole international or national. I think we're going to try to do that in 2024, to go back to the anniversary. And that brought so many, it didn't bring the people at the top because they didn't want us to do it, as he said, but it brought out lots of rank and file people who actually had to, we had to give them free buses because their leaders were not going to, honor that. So, sorry. So that's, I think there's many ways. There's a lot of bubbling of things that people are trying to do, and also to encourage that everybody should go out as much as they can to support the people that are on strike now or in a big to help them get the word out. If they have a newspaper or they have a podcast or something like that, they could be able to help to get out the what's going on with the people that are on the line. But it always encourages people when you come and you look up and you see somebody honking a horn, somebody waving at you and telling you to keep it up. We just have to get people, more and more people, excited about what their real power is, because they are the power of the whole world, basically. But we weren't taught to think that way. If we stopped one day for an hour and didn't come back until whenever we decided to go, everything would shut down in New York City. Everything would shut down. Because the workers are the ones that move everything, supply everything. So I think we have to just help them to know that they are really able to do these things, and they have been able in the past.
Clarence, I have a copy of the book that you and your wife put out, and we talked about this almost the 20th anniversary of doing that. What can Black workers learn? What can Black organizations learn, labor organizations learn, so that the next time that we can, more than triple or quadruple the numbers and to build a kind of uh, uh, um, network, and raise the kind of consciousness to deal with the centrality, around Black workers and how our labor is our labor is very central to cities working and this nation working, as Cynthia point out that. If workers were united, they shut down New York. Folks would have to come begging us for, bringing all kinds of gifts.
That's
So
right.
what do you say about that?
That's a very good point. And I would just like to say a couple of things before I address that ties into what Robin was saying. One of the first contracts that was negotiated by a labor union that dealt with the whole question of it was mechanization and modernization in 1960 was with the introduction of the container cranes on the waterfront, and where we were no longer working with winches and carrying items in individual boxes, we're putting them in containers. And the second thing is, during the course of our recent contract negotiations with the employers, what really brought the employer, what really got movement is when longshoremen in San Francisco refused to take jobs for 3 consecutive days where the hall was actually empty. The dispatchers were there, prepared to dispatch jobs, but the workers weren't. And that's what led Julie Sue, who's the acting Secretary of Labor, to come out to the negotiations, because anytime that there is no movement of cargo, that shows the power of the rank and file at the point of production. And so that still has not changed, even after all these many years. As it relates to the Million Worker March, right now in this country, there's a great deal of labor militancy and support on the part of the public for unions. And we see that. I understand today it was announced that there was a tentative agreement for the writers
Yeah.
guild. They've reached a tentative agreement. It's not. It doesn't mean it hasn't been ratified. They still working on dotting the i's and crossing the t's. Um, but I think the Million Worker March can be very helpful in this regard, because when we organized it in 2004, it was done within a year's time. When the Democratic Party was putting up John, what is his name, Kerry, as the president for the Democratic Party. What's changed now is that you've got a guy who claims he's the biggest supporter of labor since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Nothing could be farther from the truth. After what he did to the rail workers, he wouldn't even do anything to give them 7 sick days. But yet, Biden is on his way to Detroit to be on the picket line, to walk the picket line. That's not going to solve anything. However, it does indicate how much attention he's paying to the working class. So the Million Worker March can play a very important role by using its mission statement, by being able to reach out to workers. Sister Brenda is still involved. Chris O'Bara, who was the longest serving Teamster principal officer in the country, who was the East Coast coordinator along with Sister Brenda. We have mechanism in place to be able to reach workers, and the Million Worker March would be very instrumental. And I think the key thing about that struggle was that this was about rank and file leadership, and people like Brenda paid a price for what she did with the Million Worker March. So did Chris O'Bara. But the courage and the commitment to the class and to Black people and to the Black liberation movement and to international solidarity, those were all components of the Million Worker March, which we're going to need now. But that's what I would have to say, Brother Melanik, that the Million Worker March could be very instrumental in terms of letting people know, hey, we've done this before and we can do it again.
So we've had the Million Workers March, and in some ways, when the strike happened, I was thinking of Du Bois, and thinking of the general strike. What lessons, are there for us to learn, Robin, so that we can begin to execute what Clarence is talking about, what Brenda has mentioned in terms of the type of organizing that we need to do, so that we don't get hoodwinked anymore, or if it is, it's like there's a new dog and pony show that we haven't seen before. What's the lessons? What should we be caution of in terms of from a historical perspective?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer this question. It's a very good question, and in fact, because it keeps happening. But I have to say, there's a few things to consider. One, to not be hoodwinked by the Democratic Party, which happens all the time. And we're in this squeeze where the choices, are between, direct outright fascism and the ongoing neoliberal order that we've been dealing with. Neither one of those are useful pathways forward. So how do you do that? How do you navigate? How do you defend against the worst excesses? Recognize that this is an opportunity and seize upon that opportunity. And also understand that this is a very long struggle. You mentioned Du Bois and the general strike. There's sort of 3 key lessons from that strike. One is that here are people who were enslaved, who actually understood that their labor could bring the collapse of the Confederacy. They knew that. They knew it from the workplace. No one had to tell them that, number one. Number two, that they knew that when they got to union lines, it didn't mean that they were fully free. It meant that freedom was this constant struggle, that it wasn't over at that moment of escaping the plantation, but it had to keep going. And you can't sleep ever. And then the third thing they realize is that the importance of solidarity. On the one hand, solidarity amongst each other, because these are folks, many of whom never met each other, but they knew the experience coming out of being the first industrial working class in North America that is enslaved. and that they had to build something, they had to build churches and schools and institutions that could protect themselves. But the other side of solidarity is to reach out to those who are willing to support them, and there were some. And that's why Reconstruction ended up lasting longer than it did, because they did create, Black workers led the biracial coalitions that led to the Greenback Labor Party, the populist movement, all those movements that actually were challenging American capitalism. And that's why it took so long for the Northern capital and the Southern oligarchs to convince the white working class to support them and crush this movement that could have changed America. So again, it's those three things: the solidarity, the long haul, and recognizing the power that workers have. If we do that, then I think that's one way to try to escape the trap, but the trap's always there.
This question of democracy has been coming up, and it seems that you're raising the question of Reconstruction. You're raising the question of the Confederacy, but it seems at this point that we're at now is that we're dealing with which I would call the new Confederacy, right? And that the mistake was allowing the Confederacy to come back in, right? And so if we're talking about, also Black liberation in terms of our interests, what role do we play in dealing with this contradiction of dealing with the fascists and dealing with the neoliberals, right? But knowing that we got to smash this new Confederacy in order to be able to breathe. How do we? And this is for anyone to answer. In terms of the work that we have to do to bring the kind of unity, the kind of solidarity that's needed in order to focus on, a Black workers, independent Black workers movement to try to address this question. Because when you look at even during Reconstruction, it was targeting us, targeting our labor, right, states' rights, voter suppression, all that is on the table right now. I mean, there's like all kind of indictments going on just around it. They call it RICO, but we know what it is, right? So it's a broader question, but how do we deal with these contradictions in terms of which way we need to go as a Black labor force? And see, I don't know if you want to start that out, and we could get others to try to address that complex question I'm trying to raise.
I think one of the things that sometimes we forget is that Black people that don't go and vote, they're not stupid and crazy. They are at a point where they don't rely or trust anybody except for themselves at that time. And there's been efforts in the past to also have build different parties, right? The Labor Party, I can't remember all of them. There was a Freedom Party. And I think that whatever we call it, we have to have a space that is ours, and that where we can have these discussions and share with people about what's going on. Like you could point out what's going on to Black people in the diaspora. I just saw something where the people that lived in Brazil, the indigenous, that they got their land or in the process of getting their land back. So we want them to see. I keep on saying that I'm repetitive, but we have to show people that you can fight back, and other people are in the same place you are, and they will come and they will support you. Like if somebody, I think one time there was something down in the South, and it was a pickle farm or something like that, but there was also one in Europe, and they joined together to support each other. So we have to look about how you do the things that bring things larger, and all the cooperatives. You were taught, somebody was raising up the issue of cooperatives. So we have to get people. There are people that are ready for this. I would just say that I've come across. They're ready to do something different, harder, and get more people involved. And they are workers. They're not people just coming from, another place that they've never had to deal with these issues. So I think we need to find they always try to dismantle these things, but we need to always try to put it out when it's timely. And it's timely now. Nobody wants to go and even vote for anybody. In many cases, you talk to them, even local or the national. And they also do see, the thing that I see is that people feel, I don't see a lot of black people talking around me that they're scared of these people that are fascists. They know they're there. Their view is, well, they never left. This is not that one man that you're talking about. He only had one vote, right? So you need to be worried about all these other people that voted for him, and are and it's not just one person acting in a fascist way.
Right.
So
systemic.
it's exactly.
Yeah, and I want to I see you, Clarence, but I want to push you a little bit more. Is that but how do we begin to understand that the attacks that we are suffering those attacks the most, working people, particularly Black working people, women, but what vehicle do we use to be able to address that, whether folks vote or not vote, in order to be able to make sure that we could breathe.
I think we have to
Go ahead.
talk to people about how they visualize what needs to be done now, because they're not going to vote for these people. They're not going to vote for them, but they need something else. And so we have to build something else where people could come and discuss, how do I deal with this? How does our community, we're losing our homes, they're stealing our deeds. It's all manner of everything that always bothered us is still there, but it's more magnified. And they a lot of people lost their lives and everything in terms of fighting back, but there's people that are coming back up to do that. They have to fight back. They can't turn their back on it now. And so we just have to energize the movement and show people, because there were people close to having a Labor Party at one time, and close to the Freedom Party. Unfortunately, you have people that come into those that their reason for being there is to try to just make people think that yes. So we have to get into where people are now, so that we could talk to them about where they are now and where we were before and how we can move forward. I mean, it has to be real stuff. It can't just be intellectual stuff. It has to be real stuff and real movement. And people are ready to do that because they're so angry and tired of what's been happening to them. But they don't think that this is a new situation. If you're a Black person, this is not a new thing that happened.
Clarence, before you go, I know you've been hot on getting on that mic, right?
Yeah.
But I want to raise this, and maybe you can help as well, because each semester, when I go into my classroom and I deal with a lot of Black working class students, and I have a course, a first year seminar that's called Black Consciousness. And so my students raise the question, they start raising issues about Ice Slim and Sexy Brown. I mean, Sexy Red, and and they said that this was women this was liberation. And I told my students, I said, could somebody get behind me and catch me so I can faint? Right.
Right. Iceberg Slim, you're talking about.
Right.
Iceberg Slim.
Right, but the issue is that I'm saying that in terms of, like, there's a question of consciousness. I mean, I heard Craig Hall, is it at Howard, who was talking about the Deion Sanders and how that they use us as adornments and so forth, like Afrocentric rings and so forth. They put us in these positions, right? But what happens is that we're still not equitable players, so to speak. Around that. But it's how do we begin to? Is a need to raise consciousness while we're trying to organize?
Yeah, no
Because
doubt.
it seems that some people are, I won't say falling asleep. I think you're right that people know what's happening, but how do we organize in ways or inspire people to take the type of leadership that's necessary in a broader way? I mean, there is leadership, but it seems that we have to up the ante. Clarence?
Yeah. I always like to draw on um, historical analysis of especially things that I've been a part of or people who have been in organizations that I belonged to before I came into them. I had mentioned Brother Leo Robinson early on, and I want to go back to him because during the anti-apartheid struggle, where first you had community people coming to the port and saying, hey, we protest what's going on with Black people in South Africa. And the ILWU, we respect picket lines as if they were our own. This went on for many, many years, but we had Black and white rank and filers who were asking the question, Leo, what does the anti-apartheid struggle have to do with our pork chops? What does that have to do with us and our jobs? And Leo got up and brilliantly said, while they're closing plants in the United States of America, they are investing in them in South Africa. And while Ronald Reagan is telling people we're doing this constructive engagement for the purpose of changing things from the inside, it was a bunch of BS. They were there to exploit the workers.
Right.
That's what it was all about. And it wasn't until Nelson Mandela, when he did his worldwide tour and he came to the city of Oakland and spoke at the Oakland Coliseum before nearly 100,000 people, and he thanked the ILWU for refusing to unload that cargo. He got the word about that while he was in on Robben Island, and I think that's what we have to do. When we were working on the Million Worker March, Leo, who was one of the founders of the Million Worker March movement, said that we don't want to be red baited coming out the box. So we want to be able to appeal to the working class. It's kind of hard not to be red baited when you come from the ILWU with Harry Bridges and that history. But what is it that all workers can agree on? A pension, affordable housing, the ability to send their kids to college, a national living wage, and into the dismantling of public education, national health care. And it doesn't end there. But I want to tie something in that I think that we shouldn't lose sight on. There were white folks, white working class people, who voted for Barack Obama twice and then turned around in 2016 and voted for Donald Trump. Brenda is absolutely right. The general public doesn't want Biden or Trump. Yesterday, a few days ago, Biden was speaking at a congressional Black Caucus conference, and he screwed up LL Cool J's name, and then turned around and said, "That boy's got biceps as bigger than my thighs," and people are just saying, "Oh my gosh, this guy." So my point, and I think, listen, we got brilliant people, you know, who can deal with these questions. We certainly have to reach out to these folks, the white working class, who are misguided, who believe in many of the things that we believe. That Donald Trump is not going to give you $15 an hour. I mean, so I don't want to spend too much on time on that. But what I'm saying is, we have to be able to show people concretely, give them examples of why, and like, listen, the point that you made about the pedestrian stopping a couple of days ago, getting out of his vehicle. I mean, you see, this is the whole thing. He sees black people out there. He will start hurling racial slurs at black folks. It kind of reminds you of, 20 years ago when they were blaming the immigrants for taking their jobs away, and not looking at the policies. And because one of the big issues, and Professor Kelly can talk about this, is the fact that in the subconscious of white Americans, they understand this is a settler nation. They know that African Americans have been enslaved. Indigenous people have been, a genocide has been committed against them. They identify more with whiteness than they do their status as workers. And so we have to begin to challenge these things. And I'm not saying that we're going to get everybody, get white workers to become Marxist Leninists overnight. But what I am saying, we can start making them think about their interests. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party has interests contrary to yours. And one of the things we did at the Million Worker March was symbolic, but it was very important. No politician can be on that stage to speak. This is not for you. We don't care if you're Bernie Sanders. It doesn't matter, because the people have to understand that workers, we have permanent interests. We don't have permanent friends. And that's how we need for people to begin to look at themselves, their interests. I mean, it's amazing how the corporate media can ask these terrible questions about, well, don't you think you're going to be hurting the consumer? The guy says, what do you mean? He says, listen, they've been raising prices and not paying us any money. So this whole mindset, and that has to be deconstructed, and we got to be willing to challenge that. And I think that that's one of the big jobs that's ahead of us, and we can't be fearful of confronting these folks and telling them the truth. Somebody got to tell them. And I think, it's in our class interest to fight against white supremacy. I think all of us here realize that. It doesn't mean that we're, Pollyanna about racism and white supremacy. No, but we got to be willing to take it on and to show people this is how they keep us weak, by dividing us. And so Taft-Hartley has worked. And Brother Kelly, you mentioned the Nissan struggle. I was in Canton, Mississippi, with Danny Glover and Bernie Sanders. It's in the book that was held up. And it gets very personal, because some of my wife's relatives work at the Nissan plant and were against unionization. And I think the critical thing that Robin said that has to be stated, underscored again, is the importance of organization that takes place outside of labor, with community organizations, social organizations, fraternal organizations. Because when these corporations say, oh, we want to go to, we're going to bring these jobs, but we need tax deferments and all of these inducements. So you paying for jobs. And people guys say, hell no, we're not, you know what? We ain't paying for no jobs. If it's not going to be union, we don't want it. We don't want it. Because what happens is that these black folks that are in the South, that are getting paid better wages at Amazon and other places, okay, than what typically workers would get. And so they're afraid that if you get they're going to lose something. And that's what we're dealing with here. We got to take that on. So I just think that in the final analysis, we got to be very strategic, but we have to be trying to organize these white folks and get them to understand. Trump is not, what is Trump talking about? He's going to speak to the workers about what? It's insane. But they look at the answers in all the wrong places. Thank you, Brother Melanick. I'm through.
Yeah. So before I have one final response I want all of you to make, but before I do that, I want to say that this was the Communiversity South rapid response to the auto workers strike, and I want to say that it was our staff co-director, Shafi and Bilal, who helped us pull this together, and also our board member, James Pope, who also helped do the technical work to make this happen. And I want to acknowledge, both of them, because, a lot of times, things, before we even get to do something, it's over, and so we wanted to be able to respond appropriately. But for as we go out, I want to ask each of you, um, you know, where do we go from here? Real briefly, where should we go from here in terms of dealing with how we need to address Black labor, and how do we begin to build the type of unity and solidarity that's necessary? It's a brief, where do we go from here? Robin, you want to start out with?
Yeah, well, I think Brother Clarence Thomas already told us. I would just say ditto, and because in that statement are really clear directives, and there's always three things. One is, political education. That's what the community is all about. Making sure that we could connect to communities, both to learn from and to lay out the stakes and interests. The second thing is recognize that we're a class, that there's such thing as class struggle, and that the class is not always inside a factory or inside a workplace, but spread across. And the class is not always inside of a nation, and so that's, I think, important in this. And the third thing, I think, is, really recognizing politically that there's, and this is something both Brenda and Clarence mentioned, we have to trust our people's understanding of the political situation, that there's a reason why there's not always a tendency to embrace the Democratic Party, despite the fact that that's what's sold to us. And I think it's a very dangerous sales job, that we have no other choice but to support the Democrats. And once we can sort of move beyond that and not be afraid, I think it's going to open up a lot of things.
Brenda?
I'm committing myself to link up with some more workers that I know that are trying to get a democratic union, and also in terms of bringing us closer together, some of the organizations that we have worked with over the years that were related to labor and racism, to just try to get them together and then start. One sister, I know they're going to be meeting every week about how they're going to get rid of the person there. So there's stuff that they can be taken, because one thing that I use for myself when I sometimes say, oh, this is not working or it's too big or whatever, is that I look at the women in particular who and men who actually made a decision about what they were going to do, and they did it. So you have the Harriet Tubman, she didn't just talk about it, she organized and did it. You had the brothers that said, we're going to go and take all the people that were dying on these places that they had them like animals. And so there's all these people, Cassie, there's people that said that they want pensions, and they went all around the city. So I'm just saying, these people don't have phones. They don't have a lot of money or none, but they got the message out. They said, this is what needs to be done from what all of us say, and we're going to do it, and just go out and do it. And that's why I'm going to try my best to use my time to inspire those discussions, and to try to tell people where they can really get historical information to show what happened back then and what's happening now, and just try to also use that as a way to organize to support other workers that are out there now fighting back and trying to fight back. So.
Clarence?
Well, I think that this discussion, this conversation, this forum that we had today it's very important to get that out right away. This is my first opportunity, to meet Dr. Robin D.G. Kelly. I've heard a lot about him. And this has been, I was very gratified about how this thing has gone. I think this should go out right away. And I'm going to make a commitment to begin to talk about this with people in my own network about what happened here today, and to see if we can start setting up something very soon in terms of discussions. So, because we do need to, to do something. And I think that it was a wonderful idea to do this today, this rapid response, because it was very, very timely. And I'm just glad. And see, the good thing is that there's other folks thinking about this stuff other than you and I, Brenda. You know what I'm saying? And they moving on it, coming up, because this is overdue. And it's great. You got to start somewhere. And I think we need to get the word out about this, and then we'll build on that. But I'm going to work on some things. I know everybody. Melanick, it's good to see you. I know you're busy. Brenda and I are retired. I'm in the book business now, but we do what we have to do. And so, but I think that this is a good start. And but we should be able to communicate things that we're doing. I know everybody won't perhaps be able to to be on certain Zooms all the time, but at least be aware, well, this is happening and this is going on. And so that's how I see things.
Right, good. The real Clarence Thomas, Brenda Stokely, and Robin Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing the space with us today. And we wish you all well and see you down the road for the next show. Take care.
Where was
Thank you
what happened
thank
to the
you.
other brother that was on? Is
Willie Brown.
Yeah, Willie Brown.
uh-huh.
His connection was bad, so he got off. So, but we're
Okay.
gonna get back to him because
Keep hearing from them
they're engaged in struggle too. They're on the
right
line,
now.
right?
Yeah.
They're on the front line. So we
I
gotta
just
have to
want to
probably
say very quickly, I'm going to see you, Brother Kelly, in January in the University of
Right.
Washington.